Is propaganda marketing? Hi, I'm Brian Pombo. Welcome back to Brian J. Pombo Live. This is a very interesting time to be doing any type of media whatsoever, because when there are world events that kind of grab you and shake you and kind of put everybody talking about the same things, that makes it an interesting time. And whether you've been through that at some point in your life, or whether you are going through that right now or are going to see that again, I'm recording this during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'm going to tell you some really interesting things that I've been seeing. Now, I've always been a student of different types of news media, and watching how they work and watching how they manipulate and change things around, and how different sources say things completely different ways, giving you a completely different impression about what actually happened. There's very few sources that have any sense of non-bias whatsoever, or are trying to present any type of non-partisan idea. They just don't exist anymore, at least during this current period of time. And it has amazed me. This Ukrainian invasion, it affects our family because of my wife. I've mentioned before, my wife was originally from Ukraine. She still has family back there, and we're in communication with them, finding out from their perspective what's going on, but also and making sure they're still alive, so forth. But at the same time, it's caused her to watch anything she can get her hands on in terms of news. And so we've looked at every live streaming news station that's available on YouTube or anywhere else, and just trying to find anything we can and see what they are saying and see what they're showing. And overall, you get a very common perspective of what is going on, which is unusual. In most cases, it's unusual to find something like CNN and Fox News saying basically the same thing, that this was an unprovoked attack and so on and so forth. But you'll always find an exception to the rule, and I found a very interesting exception. It's called RT. It's for Russian television, and this is the American version. So it is a station that is put together specifically by the Russian government to give their perspective, and this is specifically for Americans, so it's in English. And so if you are an American, you'll appreciate this. But they also have different versions for different countries and different nationalities, so you can find your version and watch that if you're somewhere else. But it's so amazing because they have given a completely opposite idea. A lot of the specifics may be very similar in watching it, but if you're listening to me years ahead in the future, it'd be tough to go back and see this. But you really ought to do this when it comes to news media, when it comes to worldwide events that everyone's watching. And this is one of those scenarios that everybody is watching, everyone's paying attention, everyone kind of has an idea of what's going on. And to have them come out and say completely different things, like, for example, the night of the invasion, a few nights ago, they were talking about how they were specifically helping to free these new republics that were coming. I haven't heard this discussed anywhere else, but from the Russian government perspective, they're saying that there's this republic and that republic and all these places that I've never heard mentioned in Western media whatsoever. And all they are is basically they're these cities that were closer to the Russian border, and they're saying we're freeing them from Ukrainian control, and so that was just one example, but there were many examples of how they completely changed the perspective. And I'm not saying who's right or wrong. Obviously, I've got my own perspective coming from where I come from, and the sources of news, and knowing a little bit of history. I am a little bit of a student of history of this stuff, so I've got a certain perspective. But to see a different perspective and to see how it changes, because you got to think about it. Why is something like this developed? Very simply, many governments have their own news sources. They have their own news stations nowadays, cable news, satellite news. It's very common around the world. The United States is one of the one odd places that doesn't have something that is specifically owned and ran by the government other than public television. But even then, it is not promoted as a mouthpiece of the executive branch. Whereas over there, it basically is. But RT America is specifically, it's not just what the Russian government wants you to believe. This is what the Russian government wants America to believe about things. And they have, RT France and other ones, and they are very specific. They have people speaking with their accents and obviously in their language, and they are trying to present what they want France to believe. And so this is very fine-tuned form of propaganda that is it's interesting, and propaganda really is marketing. And if you can see what they're doing and not get offended by it and not get all worked up by it, but just see how these things work. Obviously, there's some form of propaganda on all news stations, regardless of what country they're coming from. But with that, you can see a very direct tie, and you can see very much what they want you to walk away with and how they want you thinking after you're done watching or listening to what they're presenting. Very interesting. It is a schooling in marketing to be able to pay attention to these things and pay attention to how different people, different sources are attempting to manipulate you to their way of thinking to come to a very specific conclusion from where they're coming from. So it's something to watch out for, and something to watch out for in all news media. But news media, make no mistake about it, you're still dealing with human beings, fallible human beings who are attempting to sell you something. They're attempting to sell you an idea, they're attempting to sell you a perhaps philosophy, and they're attempting to sell you the products that show up on the commercials. So something to keep your eye on, and something that you can, if you can watch these things and be able to step back and relate it back to how business works, I think it'd be helpful for you. So go check it out. Also, go check out my book, 9 Ways to Amazon-Proof Your Business, if you actually want to stand out in the marketplace, in your industry, and be completely different from anyone that would ever be perceived as a competitor. 9 Ways to Amazon-Proof Your Business. You can get a free copy at amazonproofbook.com. You have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, get out there and let the magic happen.